UFC is one of the fastest growing sports out there, and it's also one of the most brutal. As barbaric as some people would call it, it's now $1 billion industry, and the addictive sport clearly is here to stay. So today, we're bringing you the 10 must-known facts about MMA and UFC, and before we get started, we'll give you a bonus fact. Yes, the championship belt is made with real gold. It's worth a staggering $330,000. All right, now let's get started. Number 10. The First UFC Ever. There is no better way to start off a list of must-know about MMA and UFC than the first event ever. The first Ultimate Fighting Championship ever was on November 12, 1993, and it was held at the McNichols Sports Arena in Denver, Colorado. This thing was broadcast live on pay-per-view. Now let us take you through a little UFC history, specifically who started this cutthroat sport. Rory and Gracie and Art Davie decided to revamp the local Gracie Garage Challenge fight versus California's martial artists on national TV. In reality, the first tournament was embarrassingly low profile. The venue was less than half packed, the press ignored the event, and many of the big-name fighters refused to show up. Still, the show went on. In order to make it look brutal on TV, one of Gracie's students suggested that the fights take place in an octagonal cage with a chain-link fence. An SEG executive, Campbell McLaren, wanted it to be the televised version of Mortal Kombat. There was one brief, floating idea to tip the cage with razor wire, but even that was considered too extreme. Number 9. Deaths in MMA. When arms and legs can break at any moment during a fight, the UFC is one of the most brutal sports out there. So you can imagine the extent of the injuries fighters have to deal with. Among these deaths are João Carvalho, who died just after fighting Charlie War in Ireland. In 2 rounds, he took over 40 hard shots to the head until the referee stopped the fight. Rondell Clark died after a knockout loss. Vasquez was the first fighter to die from a sanctioned MMA bout in the country, as he passed away 5 weeks after his loss by knockout. His death was attributed to complications from blunt trauma of the head with subdural hemorrhage. Michael Kirkham died of subarachnoid hemorrhage 2 days after his TKO loss. Number 8. The $4 billion sale. In one of the most expensive deals ever, the Fertitta brothers and Dana White sold the mixed martial arts organization UFC to WME-IMG Hollywood talent agency for about $4 billion. Considering that the UFC promotion was worth $2 million when they bought it in 2001, we would say that's a pretty lucrative deal. However, it should be noted that the Abu Dhabi government still owns 10% of the UFC as well. Number 7. The Reebok Scandal. It's known as a fact that unless you're Conor McGregor, who's able to take home millions from a single fight, most of your money comes from sponsorship deals. So imagine the fighters' disbelief when the UFC made a deal on July 6, 2015 to let Reebok become the official sponsor and sole provider of merchandise for the sport. The deal was if the UFC made all their fighters wear their brand during fights and promos only, then they would pay $70 million over a 6-year period. Fighters lost out in millions over this deal, and many actually had to leave. Those who spoke out against the deal were fired, and they had their career destroyed. Number 6. Never say never. Dana White, the passionate and admittedly aggressive president of the UFC, has many faults, including feuds with the dangerous mafias of the world. But we'll get into that in a moment. One of the things White would come to regret is the interview in 2011 when he asked if women would ever fight in the UFC, and replying with a crude "never." However, that all changed when Ronda Rousey came into the picture. With her rise to power in Strikeforce, the UFC president, who claimed that women would never be a part of the promotion, ate his words. In 2012, he even admitted that it was because of Ronda Rousey that he was dipping his toe in the water, and after 2016, he went as far to claim that female mixed martial artists had surprised the men in pay-per-view. Number 5. Royce Gracie. Our next must-know fact about the MMA and the UFC concerns its number 1 and first fighter in the very first UFC event. No one expected Royce Gracie to win, but he shocked the world and his competitor when he used his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu style and tackled Ken Shamrock to the ground using a Baiana. Number 4. America's first MMA fighter. We take back what we said about the first ever MMA fight. It turns out that America's first MMA fighter was actually Theodore Roosevelt. America's 26th president did more than run an entire country and fight the railway commissions. He apparently really enjoyed occasionally boxing and punching. When he also wasn't running the First World War, Roosevelt practiced judo sport and was the first American to ever earn a brown belt. He never did end up competing in an MMA competition, but he still has a legacy as America's 26th president to fall back on. Number 3, the highest paid fighter. Coming in at number 3, we have the sport's highest paid fighter. Everyone is familiar with Irishman Conor McGregor, who tops the list of all-time highest paid UFC fighters. McGregor is the first fighter in the UFC history to hold 2 weight divisions titles simultaneously. He's the biggest pay-per-view draw, having headline totaling of 5 out of 6 highest-selling UFC pay-per-views. So you can imagine how rich he is. Even his Instagram and customized private jet don't reveal it. Many of his many millions were earned from a single match, that iconic McGregor boxing match with Floyd Mayweather. And although he lost, he still took home an easy $100 million. Now it's estimated that McGregor has a net worth of over $120 million. It's crazy to believe that $100 million of them were earned in 2017 alone, and in 2018 he earned $50 million more during his October fight against Khabib Nurmagomedov. Number 2, weight classes. Back when the UFC was just in its infancy, it was severely flawed. For example, gloves and uniforms weren't mandated as they are today, which led to cases like Art Jimerson's one-glove look. During this early period of time that predated today's version of MMA, time limits, illegal holds, and rounds were a big deal. In fact, it was a brutal no-holds-barred fight to the death, with the winner being the first fighter to totally incapacitate their opponent. At that time, what further cemented the idea the UFC was a form of human cockfighting was the fact that weight classes weren't implemented, which led to some mismatches that were gruesome. Eventually, the UFC created weight classes, but athletes take advantage of them to the extreme. In order to gain an advantage in matches, MMA fighters took to reducing their body's water weight, so before a match they would stop drinking, eating certain foods, and basically just spend a lot of time in saunas. It comes as no shock that this is extremely unhealthy, as a lack of drinking leads to dehydration, which then leads to kidney problems. That is why a lot of fighters look like skeletal versions of themselves at their weigh-ins, and during the 24 hours between the weigh-ins and the professional bout, they would put on the weight again. Take McGregor, for example, who lost 27 pounds in 2 days. In order to lose weight quickly, fighters go through an extreme diet that involved a gradual reduction in water intake, eating meals that are rich in high in fat and protein, and avoid salt at all costs. Using these methods, fighters have been known to lose over 30 pounds in 2 days. This extreme diet showed how dangerous it was with MMA fighter Leandro Souza, who died after passing out before the weigh-in for a match in Brazil in 2013. Number 1. Dana White's troubles with the Mafia. And coming in at number 1 is this insane fact and the answer as to why the UFC doesn't exist in certain countries. Before he was running the UFC, Dana ran into trouble with the mob in Boston. He used to run a boxing gym when took in kids to teach how to fight and be respectful. And notorious gangster James Whitey Bulger sent him a message that he and the mob wanted a cut of his profits. Dana got the message all right. He was on the next flight to Las Vegas that same night and never came back. Skip forward years and years into the future, and even after facing wild success with the UFC, Dana just can't seem to shake criminals off his success. His ultimate goal is said to be spreading the UFC across the entire world, but there are a few things stopping him. For a long time, the UFC was kept out of Japan with Pride Fighting Championships. But when the UFC bought Pride, Dana found an obstacle in his course: the Japanese Yakuza, who kept him and required him to pay to enter Japan. He would run into the same troubles in Mexico. And these are all the facts we have for you today. What'd you think of them? Do you enjoy MMA and the UFC? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button. And before you go, if you want to see more videos like this, subscribe to Weeklypedia. Click that notification bell to be alerted whenever we upload a new video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.